This is Land of Havilah, Isaiah 13. This chapter is a prophecy that the Babylonian Empire will demolish Judah. It came to pass about 140 years after Isaiah wrote it. The Babylonians invaded, captured Jerusalem, destroyed it, and carried the people away. The Jews didn't return for 70 years. But all this doubles as a prophecy of the Great Tribulation. Another way of saying it is that the Babylonian destruction of Judah and Jerusalem, which took place in 586 BC, serves as a foreshadowing of the destruction that will occur in Judah during the Great Tribulation. Isaiah predicted both events in this one prophecy. Regarding the second event, Jesus said in Matthew 24 that there would be an abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. He said, "When you see it, let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains. Don't delay even long enough to get anything out of the house," and so forth. "For at that time shall be a great tribulation, such as was not seen since the beginning of time." So during the Great Tribulation, according to Jesus, there will be an attack on Judah and Jerusalem. Filling in the blanks a little more, the Apostle John described something called Mystery Babylon being present during the tribulation, Revelation 17:5. Since Mystery Babylon is a mystery, we can't describe it completely, but we know it's a force for evil in the world that'll be compatible with the one world system of government during the Great Tribulation. God finally destroys Mystery Babylon in Revelation 18:2. The theme of Mystery Babylon begins in Genesis chapter 11. The population of the earth was all in one place. They were all unified, and they attempted to build a city for themselves, and in the city a tower that reached to heaven to make a name for themselves, they said, lest they be scattered over all the earth. They ignored God and glorified man. They blurred the line between God and man. We see that theme running throughout history, that men glorify themselves and ignore God, all the way through to Mystery Babylon in Revelation. Now Isaiah's prophecy, verse 1. The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw. Comment in verse 1, it's the burden of Babylon because in the end Babylon will be destroyed. A coming destruction is a burden to them. Verse 2. Set up a banner on the bare mountain. Lift up your voice to them. Wave your hand that they may go into the gates of the nobles. I have commanded my consecrated ones. Yes, I have called my mighty men for anger, even my proudly exulting ones. Comment in verses 2 and 3, the way it played out in history, God was angry with Judah and used the Babylonian kingdom to execute his anger on them. In verse 2, it was as if God lifted up a banner in Judah and said to the Babylonians, "Come on in." In verse 3, he calls the Babylonians his consecrated ones, meaning he ordained them to destroy Judah. The ancient Babylonians were proudly exultant in verse 3, which is the same as the self-glorification of Mystery Babylon in Revelation 18:7. So now here come the ancient Babylonians invading, verse 4. The noise of a multitude is in the mountains, as of a great people, the noise of an uproar of the kingdoms of the nations gathered together. Yahweh of armies is mustering the army for the battle. They come from a far country, from the uttermost part of heaven, even Yahweh and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Comment in verse 4, a multitude of nations is attacking. Yahweh's mustering a multinational army against Judah led by Babylon. It turned out the army included soldiers from Chaldea, Aram, Moab, and Ammon, 2 Kings 24:2. And in the second attack, we'll have to see how it plays out, but maybe it'll be by a multinational army of the one world government of the time. In verse 5, the armies come from a far country, which would fit in with a natural understanding of the situation, and from the uttermost part of heaven, which means from further away than anyone could imagine, even perhaps from the other side of the globe, or from God himself, since this is his wrath playing out against Judah. The nations are weapons of God's indignation in verse 5 to destroy the whole land. Now, speaking of God's eventual retribution against the Babylonian system, because he's not pleased with them either, what's coming up continues to be a mixture. It's the destruction of ancient Babylon and the destruction of Mystery Babylon of the prophetic future. Verse 6, Wail, for the day of Yahweh is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and everyone's heart will melt. Comment, the day of Yahweh in verse 6 is the day of the Lord in most other translations. It's a repetitive term in the Bible that usually refers to the end times, and it does mean end times here, but it also means the day of the Lord when God destroyed Judah at the hands of the Babylonians. In other words, the Babylonian destruction of Judah and Jerusalem is a historical prelude to what the day of the Lord will be like in end times when Jesus returns to dispatch with his enemies on the entire earth. It'll be a day of destruction from the Almighty. In verse 7, it'll be a day of feeble hands and melting hearts. It was that way when the Babylonians invaded Judah, and it'll be the same when Jesus returns to the earth. It'll be a day of terror, Amos 5:18-20. Still speaking of the day of the Lord, both the historical version and the future version, verse 8. They will be dismayed. Pangs and sorrows will seize them. They'll be in pain like a woman in labor. They'll look in amazement one at another. Their faces will be faces of flame. Behold, the day of Yahweh comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners out of it. For the stars of the sky and its constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going out, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. Comment, in the historical day of the Lord, when the Babylonians invaded Judah, the darkening of the stars, sun, and moon was symbolic of difficult times. It wasn't literally dark at the time. At least the biblical account of it doesn't mention any literal darkness or disturbances in the heavens. But in the tribulation, there's a possibility that the darkening of the sun, moon, and stars will be literal. Jesus described darkening of the heavenly bodies as the final sign that he was about to appear, Matthew 24:29. Whether that was literal or figurative, we'll have to see. Now, coming up, more about the day of the Lord, which was the invasion of Judah in ancient times, and the day of the Lord in end times. It'll be a frightening day. But let's keep in mind that when Isaiah wrote this, both events were in the future. Since he was right about the first event, he'll be right about the second one also. Verse 11, I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I'll cause the arrogance of the proud to cease and will humble the arrogance of the terrible. I'll make people more rare than fine gold, even a person than the pure gold of Ophir. Therefore I'll make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place in Yahweh of armies' wrath, and in the day of his fierce anger. It will happen that like a hunted gazelle and like sheep that no one gathers, they'll each turn to their own people and will flee each to their own land. Everyone who's found will be thrust through. Everyone who's captured will fall by the sword. Their infants also will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be ransacked and their wives raped. Comment in verse 11, quote, I'll punish the world for their evil, end quote. It's a prophecy against the entire world that when Jesus returns, he'll punish the world for its evil. In verse 12, people will be more rare than fine gold, which means not very many people will survive the Lord's return. In ancient times, Judah was left depopulated, 2 Kings 25:11 and 12. And by reading Revelation, we wonder if anyone in the world survives, but from Isaiah here, we know that at least a few rare ones will. Then in verse 16, infants will be dashed in pieces, houses ransacked, and wives raped, which describes the Babylonian invasion, but it might also describe last-minute evils perpetrated by man in the day of the Lord. Now, turning to the invading Babylonians and what will eventually happen to them, verse 17, Behold, I'll stir up the Medes against them, who will not value silver, and as for gold, they will not delight in it. Their bows will dash the young men in pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not spare children. Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be like when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited, neither will it be lived in from generation to generation. The Arabian will not pitch a tent there, neither will shepherds make their flocks lie down there. But wild animals of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of jackals. Ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will frolic there. Wolves will cry in their fortresses, and jackals in the pleasant places. Her time is near to come, and her days will not be prolonged. The fate of Babylon is in verses 17 to 22 we just read. In verse 17, God will stir up the Medes against them. That came to pass when the empire of the Medes and Persians under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 B.C. In verse 19, Babylon will be like when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, meaning Babylon will be wiped out of existence. In verse 20, it'll never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. That's the case now that today Babylon is uninhabited, except that it's an archaeological site. In the final verses, 21 and 22, wild animals will inhabit Babylon, which is the case today. So in summary, the day of the Lord in the end times will be a day of terror and judgment against the world, similar to the terror in Judah when the Babylonians invaded. And also, God will judge Babylon, which we saw in ancient times, and which we'll see again in the Great Tribulation. God will destroy Mystery Babylon, the mother of abominations, throughout history. Revelation 17:5. We mentioned the abomination of desolation prophesied in Daniel 11:31 and 12:11. The fulfillment of it turned out to be the setting up of an idol in the temple of the Lord by Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes in 167 B.C. Then when Jesus came, he pointed out that the same prophecy of Daniel applied to the Great Tribulation, Matthew 24:15. It seems there will be a temple in Jerusalem at the time of the tribulation, and the man called Antichrist, or man of sin, or man of destruction, will sit in the temple, setting himself up as God, 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Immediately after that abomination, there will be an attack on the Jews in the area, Matthew 24:15 to 21. That attack will resemble the attack by the Babylonians according to this chapter of Isaiah. But that's all an attempt to fit together this mysterious puzzle. Isaiah 14 is next.